Hi, my name is Junko Yoshida, Editor-in-Chief of the Ojo Yoshida Report. Uh, this is a session we call Chat with Junko and Bola. Bola is my partner in crime. He's a publisher and managing editor. Bolaji Ojo is in this video frame, I think. And today, we are going to zoom in our discussion on the regulations and legal framework of highly automated vehicles. And it's very fortunate for us to have two best minds who can talk about this issue. One best legal mind, another best technical mind. The first, let me introduce William Wyden. Hi, Bill.
Hello.
Okay, so Bill is a professor of law at the University of Miami School of Law. And then we have another here is Phil Holtman. Hi, Phil.
Hi, great to see you.
Hello, Phil.
Yeah, same here. So the Phil is an associate professor with Carnegie Mellon University, Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering. And he's also a safety expert. Okay, so let's start the discussion because I wanted to have both of you here in the same space because personally, I've been a little bit freaking out and I don't think I'm the only one to see what's going on currently in San Francisco for Robotaxi. Part of the reason for freaking out for me is that operators of Robotaxi said that Robotaxis are safer than human-driven cars. But we have begun to see, as an evidence, we have begun to see that Robotaxis make kind of very inhuman driving errors. And that got me worried first. And second, when California CPUC, California Public Utility Commission, made a decision earlier in August that allowing the expansion of Cruise and Waymo robotaxi operation, I realized, geez, there really isn't much regulation on this, on this very topic. So I'm going to ask. I'm very straightforward that I kind of lost the confidence in Robotaxi right now. Where do you guys stand, Paula? You're in Switzerland, but what are you seeing and where do you stand?
I guess my concern, I've not driven in a robotaxi. I have no desire or intentions to be driven in one at this moment. I'm just going to be upfront, blunt about that. I'm not going to do bungee jumping with my life, and I don't see any novelty in it for me until I know that the regulatory environment is strong and in place, until I'm aware that the regulators are actually sitting down there and doing their jobs, and until I'm confident that the companies, Waymo and whoever else is running these, have taken into consideration all of the factors that people like Bill and Phil have been raising over years. It's just like the government just decided to say, ignore all of these people, don't worry about them, we're just going to do whatever we want to do. I cannot find myself in any one of that kind of situation driving in one. So upfront, maybe I'm one of those people who you cannot sway over at this point.
All right. So I'm going to ask Phil, do you think public confidence in Robotaxi is kind of going away? What do you think?
Well, I think it's on a downhill slide. I did a couple interviews this week, and both times they started with "tell us all the bad stuff," and I had to say, no, let me explain why this is so amazing before we get to the bad stuff. And these were pretty broad public venues, right? Like public radio kind of thing. So the discourse is definitely skewing that way. I think, I have a theory for this. It's that you started, Junko, by saying that they're selling safety. They're selling safety and accessibility, but it's really, the giant cruise ad is like humans are killing all these people, so robots will be better is the bottom line, right? Okay.
Right.
And I think that's a mistake. But there's a nuance here that really matters. They're selling safety, but they're not really selling safety. They're saying that our robotaxis will be safe because they don't make stupid human mistakes. That's what they're really saying. Now, they don't say stupid, they say human error. And then the people say, oh, people drive crazy. You've seen people drive crazy, but it really boils down to we'll be safe because humans are terrible. And the implicit thing is the connection people make is that means we won't make stupid mistakes. And the big dynamic in San Francisco is we have videos of them making stupid mistakes. And that just eviscerates their whole argument about we'll be safe because we won't be stupid. Well, there they are driving into concrete. There they are running into a bus. We have all these sensors, so we would never hit a bus. Well, they hit a bus, right? We're dragging power lines down the street. Oh my goodness. There's all these bad optics. And the thing that's tricky is they can claim they're safer than humans because and to be clear, it's predictions rather than outcomes, right? And some of them are more credible than others, but I won't name names there. All right. But you can say all that you want. We don't know yet we don't know about fatalities yet. But what we were promised is they wouldn't drive stupid, and they're driving stupid. So that, that the game's kind of over, right? And they're fumbling the ball with messaging because of that. They're fumbling the ball with local relations with San Francisco. They're fumbling the ball with getting the public irritated about the disruption. Okay, so I won't do the launch onto the longer rant, but
Right.
I think they've already lost some trust, and their playbook is guaranteed to lose more trust.
Yeah, I would add that in terms of selling safety, there's a subtext to that, which is either that we're safer than a human driver, or that if you deploy us, we will create a positive risk balance. And the important thing is that they haven't driven anywhere near enough miles for us to have a warranted scientific belief that that's anywhere near true. And so because they really can't back it up with data, they're backing it up with this sort of argument about not making human mistakes. And we're obviously seeing the human mistakes, not there, but we're seeing robot mistakes, okay? And then we also don't have the data statistically to show that they're better on fatalities or other accident measures. And so they really need to have another focus on safety from a different angle in order to, I think, maintain or restore public confidence. And I'll let Phil speak to that, but Phil's worked on all kinds of technical standards that are safety standards, which if they adopted, I think would go a long way towards helping boost public trust.
That is number one, isn't it? I mean, let's start from there, Phil.
Yeah, to be a little nuanced about this, there are projections they think they'll be safer. And for fatalities, 95 more million miles to go before we have any idea how that turns out. For crashes, there are statistics about crashes, but they require a lot of very sophisticated analysis. And some companies are completely opaque. We have no idea where those bar charts came from. And that the metrics are completely cherry picked. Other companies are more credible, but if you're trying to talk about the public, a sophisticated mathematical analysis involving all these sophisticated techniques based on all this data that says, yeah, we're probably better, and then your car or your competitor's car hits a fire truck, the public's going to go with, I saw them hit a fire truck, this is bad. And if they keep doing that, the public confidence is just going to be gone. And so I think one of the lessons is sophisticated analysis and predictions are no match for the optics of hitting a fire truck. And that hurts the whole industry. It doesn't matter which company it is. I mean, that's where we are.
Yeah, okay. That's so true, right? And we actually, everybody saw in front of our eyes, what's going on. So, there's just a lot of discussions around this everywhere, evening news headlines, and a lot of press has been writing about this, but I have seen very little media and the automotive industry or AV industry talking about legal issues. And I want Bill to explain why legal frameworks could become a tool to restore the public confidence in robotaxis.
Okay, well, one of the problems is that we're not really sure who is responsible for losses from accidents that are caused by automated vehicles. And the simplest way to do it would be to pass a statute that set forth clear lines of responsibility. The general approach of the auto industry to date has been to say, well, we don't need legal reform because existing legal rules are satisfactory to allocate all kinds of liability. Well, that seems to me just false for a whole lot of reasons. One of which is the technology is so complicated. If you had to prove a design defect or a product defect in an ADS, an automated driving system, it would be incredibly expensive and incredibly difficult because the machine learning systems that you have are opaque. And so you put any person who is a victim of an ordinary automobile crash at a big disadvantage of proof and time and money. And there is an alternative, which is to create a concept of a computer driver, make the computer driver responsible to drive like a human driver. And anytime the computer driver falls short of the duty of care that we would impose on a human driver, then you would find liability. Now, this is an approach that GM seemed to admit back in a California case in 2018, when in a pleading in a case called Nilsson v. GM, they admitted that their Chevy Bolt that they were using for testing owed a duty of care to other persons on the road. And if the industry would adopt that policy, then I think you'd have a way to go. Mercedes recently, in response to questions about their level 3 technology, refused to agree that they owed a duty of care, that their vehicles owed a duty of care, and they just recited a bunch of things about product liability, which was discouraging.
All right, so
You mentioned
just to stop right here, that I want Bill to explain in layman's terms, what do you mean by duty of care?
Duty of care is just a standard that has evolved in tort law, which requires people to behave as a hypothetical reasonable person would behave in that situation. Because it's a hypothetical reasonable person, it's deemed to be an objective standard. But what it really comes down to is a jury looking at the facts of the case and deciding whether the person behaved well or poorly. And if they behave poorly, then they would have liability for negligence.
So
And of
let
course,
me
there's
try and
higher
give,
standards. You could be reckless or something, and then you would have liability.
but as the engineer, let me try and give a concrete example, okay? And Bill can keep me straight because he's the lawyer, but for example, a reasonable person does not run through a red traffic light unless there's something weird, like they're being pushed through it by a truck, or you have some excuse, right? That's not the only standard, but if a jury looks at it and says, what was that person thinking? That's probably not a reasonable person.
Right. Okay.
Right. And if you're essentially, the tort law doesn't allow a human driver to be a distracted driver. Okay. And so if you're distracted and you're not paying attention to the road and you cause an accident, you can have liability. And we don't know why an ADS went through the light, but it's perhaps something like behaving like a distracted driver.
Okay.
when you talk, Bill, about the computer driver, basically you're equating the computer driver with the auto manufacturer. Is that why they don't want to accept responsibility for it?
Yeah, they don't want to be judged, and I'm saying this generally because perhaps GM is okay with it based on their court filing, but generally what favors the industry is delay and lack of clarity. because if it's going to take 5 years and $1 million to prove that there was a design defect in an ADS, then that gives them a very practical shield from liability. Okay, if they have theoretical liability, if there was a design defect, but good luck in the real world proving it.
I guess,
So
Junko,
that-
one concern that I had, Junko, is this, that the phrase that Dale just used now, the lack of clarity. There's so much lack of clarity about all of these issues, and the lack of clarity is really a concern. I mean, we're addressing the responsibility part here, but we also need to address, from an engineering point of view, the performance. Also, there is so much lack of clarity, and I don't see anybody stepping up to say, okay, here are the things that need to be done, and here are the lines we need to follow. That is my personal concern.
Well, I think this approach helps with that, Bola. You're absolutely right. It's all very muddy, very messy. This approach helps. So the basic idea is that if you have a car and there's a human driver not actively controlling it, I like to draw the line at who's steering. And if the car has sustained steering control, really the car is driving and the person's watching, you can't, it's not really a driver, you're watching, right? And that gets, we're not going to go there into the details. We did like a whole other discussion on that. But at some point, the car is driving, the person's not driving, or they may not even be a person, right? And so if the car is driving, what does it mean to break a traffic law? So in San Francisco, they're having this problem. They can't write tickets because writing a ticket for a moving violation requires the name of a driver. And maybe they'll put the CEO of the company in, but is that really the driver? The law is so broken, they can't even write moving violation tickets for a Robotaxi, right? Because it just didn't envision other than a human driving. So the idea is we create this thing called a computer driver, and a computer everywhere in the laws, it says driver, it means computer driver or human driver as may be applicable. But the computer driver can't go to jail and it can't pay fines. So the manufacturer is the responsible part, like the parent of the computer driver. They're responsible, but then all the existing laws come into play, both for motor vehicles and tort law, right? So that's why computer driver is so important, is it's a drop-in for human driver. But once you have that, now, if a car runs a red light, you don't really want to hire someone and spend the product liability cases, the hundreds of thousands, more likely millions of dollars to get hold of all the source code. And there's a locked, secure room with a guard outside, and people fly in and they spend weeks. And how do you do that with a neural net? It's like, which neuron caused the crash? I mean, good luck with that. I mean, maybe you can do it, but it's going to be really hard and really expensive. But the reality is the car ran a red light and it hit something, or it failed to yield to a fire truck. Why are we looking at the source code or the neural net training data when it ran a red light? Aren't we kind of done? And the law doesn't really allow us to go there now. You should be able to say, it's not product liability. So Mercedes-Benz says, oh, it's product, we're responsible for product liability. It's like, that's not the question. The question is, if you run a red light and kill someone, why isn't that the same as a human driver running a red light and kill someone? And right now it's kind of not, and that needs to get fixed.
Right. What will happen over time, I would predict that if you didn't take regulatory action to create the status of a computer driver over tens of years, 10, 20, 30 years, the common law would evolve, I believe, to create the concept of a computer driver on its own. That's the same way that back in the teens and 20s of the 1900s, product liability was developed to begin with. It used to be you had to show negligence to show liability, and then it was found too difficult to prove negligence for a company. So they thought they were doing the consumers a favor by letting them say, oh, just prove a product defect and there will be liability. But that's when a product defect was much more obvious. Like tires on vehicles were wooden, and if you had a wooden spoke break, well, okay, it looked like a product defect. That was easier than proving that someone was negligent. But what's happened is what originally was a benefit for consumers, in the sense that you didn't have to prove negligence, with an extremely complex product, has become a shield, because you'd rather prove negligence because it's now easier, okay? And so we're coming full circle. But for consumers, why wait 10, 20, 30 years for the common law to develop when I could have a single consistent national standard that the feds could put in place saying that as to performance of vehicles, they have to perform up to the standard of a human or they'll have liability.
Well, actually, computer driver, in my opinion, is a very elegant solution because we really don't change a lot of things that are currently in place, right? Because and it's easy for even for laymen, it's easy to understand. Here's a human driver, here's a computer driver. We want both to behave well. We don't either side to behave badly. And that is really the bottom line. But right now, when there's no concept of computer driver, we just don't know who behaved badly, how. And that is going to come back to the consumers humans who have to prove everything, right?
Right. Let me say one thing, right? The concept of a computer driver might well be an interim solution. And it only operates when you have a significant percentage of the population that is familiar and has domain expertise with driving. Because when they have that domain expertise, they're able to apply it as a judge or a juror because they know what's expected of a human driver. Now, in 30 years, 50 years, if everyone has an AV, well, you would have had to then go to a different approach of some sort, right? But at least for now, while we've got rapidly changing technology, this is an elegant solution, at least in the interim.
To be clear, it doesn't solve safety entirely, but it sort of puts a safety net under it, if you will. That, if it's so bad that if a robotaxi or a robotruck, if a computer driver is behaving so badly, everyone would say that's a terrible human driver if a human were in it. That's clearly bad. Now, that's not enough to get you to safety, but it at least gets you in the right ballpark.
Right. I mean, I would say, and I've said before a Washington State committee when I was testifying, I said, look, I don't like regulation. I'd like to like AVs. If you get really clear liability rules, I would be very prepared to give companies near carte blanche to deploy these things because the risk of them making payouts would, I think, motivate safety in a way that this lack of clarity does not. Now, in truth, I'm not satisfied just with liability. I think they ought to follow consensus industry safety standards as well. But boy, that would be a big first step.
California has decided to go the other, well, I mean, you guys have been saying this for a while now, and California has just ignored you and said, okay, we're just going to go ahead and do what we want to do. Is it that they have better information, better data, or what's propelling that decision?
I think lobbying may have something to do with it. I don't know. Yeah. It's also a difficult area. Maybe they just don't have the technical expertise.
Yeah, lack of technical expertise, and also the heavy duty lobbying is another reason, I think.
Is it also likely then that the auto manufacturers may think along the lines of, we're just going to do what we want to do, and if problem comes up, then we'll resolve it at that point in the court of law?
Well, right. They would like to get as large a deployment as possible and get the technology throughout the United States so that it's difficult to reverse course. Okay. Now, there's one thing that I would say that usually you would talk about a level 3 vehicle and a level 4 vehicle differently. The level 4 vehicle is the Robotaxi. The level 3 vehicle is what Mercedes has approval to sell series production of in California and Nevada. But Phil and I had worked, and I would say Phil did the lion's share on these definitions to deal with what happens when you have a computer driver have to hand off control to a human driver. Because the safety concept in a level 3 vehicle is that the human has to be there to assume control after some kind of notice. And my fear is that the computer gives a notice, the human is in an unrecoverable position, an accident occurs, And then they're subject to either criminal or civil liability. And Phil, you have the technical specs and background of things you've looked at to create a framework for that.
Can you explain that, Phil, a little bit?
Sure. The idea is that when you have a computer driver, that's something that's continuously controlling steering. And so that goes all the way down to things that people call level 2 now. But we've known for decades that people are terrible at supervising if the car does steering. Once you take away steering, people just drop out. NTSB has confirmed that we've had these crashes. I mean, anyone paying attention knows that humans are terrible at supervising steering. And there are driver monitors that try and keep them alert, but it always goes down to you didn't pay attention, so it's your fault. And we're not going to stop the crashes if we keep blaming the drivers. So the idea is that when the computer driver accepts responsibility for steering, the manufacturer also accepts responsibility for crashes, but with a couple big ways to escape so it's fair and balanced. One way to escape is if the driver may still need to pay attention. That's up to the manufacturer to decide how much attention, right? But if the driver monitor yells at the driver that they're not paying attention, give the driver maybe 10 seconds to get it together. And after that, it's no longer the manufacturer's fault. So that motivates the companies to build an effective driver monitor as opposed to driver monitoring theater, which is what we're seeing from some, but not all companies, right? That's part one. And so your driver monitor has to actually work or the company's liable, right? Is that so unreasonable? Because we know it's a problem. It's certainly foreseeable misuse many times over with fatalities to show for it. The second half is, as Bill said, if the computer driver doesn't want to carry the ball anymore, that's okay. They can tell the person to take over, but it shouldn't be the person's responsibility to notice, oh, that went from 60-meter fog to 50-meter fog, so now I have to take over because this thing has a 50-meter fog ODD. Yeah, good luck with that. I don't think I could tell the difference, right? So the machine has to know what its limits are. Isn't that Clint Eastwood? Man's got to know his limitations, right? The machine has to know its limitations. And when it hits its limitations, it has to give, again, like a 10-second warning to the driver saying, hey, driver, I need you to take over. You got at least 10 seconds. And by the way, if I'm about to drive you over a cliff in really terrible conditions, maybe it's longer, but in no event should the human be blamed for responding in less than 10 seconds, right? So 10 seconds is a floor, not a hard limit. And if you do those two things, now you have the ability of the companies to decide. I mean, they could always say, I'm not going to engage, right? You have the abilities to selectively decide they're in charge, and you have a way for them to cleanly hand the duty of care back. So as engineers, we look at about driver takeover and over this, but really from a legal point of view, it's a clear definition of who has the duty of care when, and how do you transfer the duty of care without turning the driver into a moral comfort zone that's just there to accept blame.
And the truth is, yeah, go ahead.
No, we're just going to say, I mean, the concern would be, and this could be negative. I would like for consumers, and I would think all L3 manufacturers should want, don't tell me when the manufacturer is liable, but please just tell me when the consumer isn't, okay? Because if the consumer is truly going to be given their time back to relax while they're watching a video or reading a book or whatever they happen to be doing, I'd like to relax and not be worried looking over my shoulder that if there's an accident that I'm going to be held responsible either while the system is engaged or more likely in a situation where the computer has asked me to take control and I have not yet had a fulsome opportunity to do so, right? I mean, let's suppose I took a nap. I fell asleep and the design allows me to do that. You have this well-known phenomenon of sleep inertia that when you wake up, you're not quite ready the moment that your consciousness comes. It takes a time for you to get ready to actually act. And so the law should reflect that without having to deal with at least the early stages through some complicated allocation of responsibility. Sure, after 10 seconds, maybe we'll talk in the courts and decide what was reasonable and what wasn't. But at least create a safe harbor so that the consumer can use it and be comfortable. And I don't even need to say initially whether the manufacturer's at fault.
And the idea here is to produce a safe harbor so we don't waste court time on, well, the car told you half a second before the crash you were in control. What's your problem? Well, that's plainly ridiculous. Why we go into court over that, right?
Right. And when the federal government passes regulations, they have, I think it's the Office of Management and Budget has to do a study which evaluates how much cost and so forth will be associated with the particular regulation or law, whatever it happens to be. And in the case of a law dealing with automated vehicles, it seems to me they ought to consider, well, what's this going to do? Just look at the cases in the federal courts alone that are based on diversity jurisdiction. There was maybe 300 product liability cases a year and over 5,000 that dealt with motor vehicle accidents. If I'm converting traditional motor vehicle accidents into product liability cases, even if the rate is lower, I'm going to be increasing dramatically the number of product liability cases that have to be heard in the federal courts. And you can't ignore that in terms of court costs. And Lord knows where you're going to find all the experts who can be qualified to testify in those cases. And remember, you need one for each side. And usually in those cases, you'll have multiple experts on each side. So it's a tremendous systemic cost that is totally avoided if you have a computer driver standard that's based on reference to human negligence.
If we go back just really briefly to the core question that was raised initially when Junko started talking, the confidence. Are we going to be able to solve that confidence level with any one of these suggested solutions, or the California government's approach?
I think,
or they just don't care whether the consumer is confident enough or not.
well, let's split them. Let's pick California confidence. I'll go to confidence first. We can come back to California. You can remind me, okay? For the confidence, if you look at the Mercedes-Benz announcement, what it amounts to is, well, as long as you don't misuse our product, we stand behind it. Oh, by the way, it's whisper, by the way, product liability, which most people don't understand, that has nothing to do with negligence, right? And how completely painful product liability is to prove, right? But the other thing about confidence, if I'm a consumer and I don't understand that I've been given it's 3-card Monte with the product liability thing, and they're hiding it. Let's just set that aside and talk about the used properly. Well, what if page 372 in fine print on the manual says, oh yeah, you can't use it in light fog and it's your responsibility not to do that. Or you can't use it where there are bad pavement lines. What's a bad pavement line? What percent of opacity of white paint does there have to be, and how many rocks and scrapings are, I'm a technical guy. I have no idea how I'd measure that. I'm sure someone has a measurement somewhere. I'm sure there's a journal paper somewhere, but an ordinary driver, they're not going to be able to deal with this, right? And so I read that, and knowing how companies act and having done all those click-through screens that no one takes time to read, what I'm going to say is that if I have a crash, they're going to find a way to get me because they put some weasel words in, right?
Yeah.
And so anytime that comes out, you lost trust. And the first lawsuit where someone loses a case for a crash because of the weasel wording, because of the lawyer wording, the confidence is just going to completely collapse, right? I mean, who wants to set themselves up? Oh, you're not responsible for going to jail because our self-driving car hurt someone at a crash scene going by. You're not responsible as long as you follow the directions. By the way, there's 73 pages of fine legal print on the directions. Who wants to set themselves up? And I mean, I've read the owner manual. I just know this is how companies behave, right? Who wants to set themselves up for that? Instead, they could say, look, when the green light's on, we got the ball. It's our problem. And we've worked with the states to make sure you're not going to go to jail if the green light is on. It has to be that simple if you want people to trust it.
Agree.
And something California. But Bill, did you have something to add to what I just said?
Well, I was just going to say that we've seen this same bad movie before, okay, with the railroad industry and safety. The railroad industry opposed almost every safety measure that came up, everything from air brakes so you could stop a train to automatic couplers so that workers wouldn't lose fingers. And it wasn't until Ivy Lee became the publicity advisor for the Pennsylvania Railroad that they changed course. They adopted a lot of these safety measures and they made their accident investigations public, where formerly they were private. And Pennsylvania Railroad became very admired because of it. But in my analysis, and I think Phil agrees, that by that time it was a little too late for the railroad industry. The public had turned against the railroad industry, both for rate gouging and for these accidents that were happening. And you ended up, I think, with overregulation that hurt the industry. And so if I were protective for the AV industry, I should say, I want this stuff because I don't want to have the public turn and get overregulation. And that's the risk that they're really running here, okay? And so I think that, you know, they're but we've seen it, industry, that's what they've done time and time again.
Yeah, that's a great example. It's and I think a lot of the automotive industry or AV industry guys always say that, oh, we don't want regulation, right? And be careful what what you wish for in a way,
Well,
because
right, but
it's
if the
from that.
regulation is focused first and foremost on liability, like I said, and I may be a little more relaxed than Phil on that, but like I said, I'd get you close to carte blanche if you took appropriate responsibility for liability, because I would trust the legal system to create the proper financial incentives. Okay, but the moment that you're not going to be straight with liability, well, then you absolutely need every single safety standard that the industry adopts and doesn't follow needs to be followed.
Yeah,
Okay.
what they're saying is we're not going to follow the safety standards because the liability to keep us honest. And by the way, we don't do liability either. And that's sort of where we ended up. And Bola, you asked about California because let me answer that because it ties in. All right. What's going on in California is the car companies do whatever the heck they want until they cross a line. And until a few weeks ago, nobody knew what the line was. Apparently the line is crashing into a fire truck with its lights on and its siren going. And that gets crews cut back by 50%. So we found out where that line is. I don't know where the next line is, but that's it for regulation in California. That's all we have to work with right now.
Right. And one thing I would say, and I don't really feel sorry for the AV industry, but I do a little bit, okay, in the sense that the publicity that they're getting is negative, 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 okay? And it may be that some of it approaches a level of sensationalism, which is to sell papers. And that may not always be balanced either. And you saw that with the railroads, okay? The railroads had really bad accidents. They were terrible with safety, but the tabloids at the time blew them even up bigger than they were, okay? And so what you need to do is adopt a responsible strategy towards liability and safety so that people and the newspapers will tone down as appropriate. It's not always, sometimes it is shocking, but sometimes it's not. And if you want balanced reporting, then you have to have a balanced approach to how you're developing your product.
Well, as a member of the press, let me just inject myself here because, okay, people do go for sensationalism, but in this particular case in San Francisco, the party that went for sensationalism was the AV industry. It was them who haunted the public saying humans are terrible drivers.
Oh, yeah,
and that hypocrisy got, get all the media,
oh, yeah,
upset, really.
There's nothing like hypocrisy to set off that kind of a reaction. And that's why I said they largely deserve it, but a little bit of it makes me feel like you know, sorry, because the industry, I'd like, you know, if it could succeed and help us, I would like it to. Okay, but don't keep making these foolish mistakes because they're setting themselves up for overregulation, public backlash. You know, who knows? And it's unnecessary.
Yeah, the industry cries about, oh, it's unfair, sensationalism. Well, they basically pointed the shotgun at their foot, pulled the trigger halfway, and then waited to see what happened with publicity. And guess what? That's what happened. When you say, there's this Cruise full page ad that very clearly communicates, first of all, humans cause all crashes. We know that's not true, but you know, so many numbers, so many fatalities. And it's the number of all crashes, not the number attributed to humans, right? And here's our Robotaxi. Here we're going to make it all better. And the message is because humans are terrible drivers, and then they're terrible drivers. Well, you know, they're the ones who set themselves up for that. Oh, what did you expect was going to happen? They should not be selling on safety. It's going to take years to figure out how the fatalities turn out. And every time you make a little mistake, you're going to get bad press. That's just a completely misguided marketing campaign. I mean, maybe it was okay in the early days, but they should be saying, here's the public benefit we're going to get, and we're doing our best on safety. Yeah, there's going to be crashes, but don't get into this game of playing with statistics and trying to say how you're saving. We're already saving lives. Like, well, no one knows yet. We're not there, right? Don't go for safety, go for public benefit. And if you don't have public benefit, then you've got a problem, because what exactly is your business strategy?
Right. And I should add, and I think Phil and I both feel the same about local regulation being preempted. You talk about not behaving responsibly. The industry is trying to preempt all local regulation. Let me give you one example. Okay. Suppose that I issue a permit for a parade. Okay. And it's an advanced permit. And the AV company could see the permit, right? They could go down to the office and every week and see what the permits are. They ought to make that permit area for where the parade's going to go off limits. That should be a dynamic temporary exclusion from the ODD, because the vehicles would not necessarily have been trained well to handle the parade. Okay. And so why in the world wouldn't you both allow that and allow it to happen at the local level? It doesn't make any sense for the state to be trying to control special events like that. Okay. And who in the world could argue against that? Well, I guess the AV industry would argue against it, but it's insane.
Yeah. The AV industry attitude seems to be, well, we're in your city and too bad, nothing you can do. So put up with it. That's a problem. And what is that doing for public sentiment? Well, I mean, people are upset they're putting traffic cones on robotaxis, right? Which is a really interesting thing, because it really graphically illustrates how brittle these things are, and how easy it is, and how clueless they are with things a person could deal with, but they haven't been trained to. And by the way, why can't, it's just a traffic cone. The least they can do is pull to the side of the road out of traffic until the retrieval team comes to get the cone.
Yeah, rather than stopping right there, right?
Yeah.
Right. And they don't necessarily need an in-person helper to deal with that. That might be an area where a remote driver could help. In other words, if you had an effective remote driver monitoring system and you had noticed that, oh, there's a parade, or more likely there's a one-off event like a fire or something, okay, then even if the vehicle itself doesn't have the programming to stop and not go into the area, well, if there's a human monitor back at a station, they could either halt the vehicle or divert it to another route. But you don't even have to divert it. Just stop it in a safe manner.
In fairness, they say they have that, and they say it works almost all the time. But what we're seeing is when you scale up a fleet beyond 1 or 2 cars to hundreds of cars, almost all the time isn't good enough.
Right. And, you know, people worry about jobs. Well, if maybe you could have one person monitor 5 vehicles, I don't want to speculate how much, but there could be a scale where instead of needing 5 taxi drivers to monitor the situation as a human, you could cut it down to 1 in 5. Okay. And so those people would need training. Presumably they would be or could be part of a union, and they could be good jobs.
Or
In
you
a-
put
in,
people at
uh,
local coffee shops to grab cones off cars nearby. I mean, whatever. But the issue is, if they're going to create these problems and get the local population upset, it's on them to deal with the consequences, right? I'm not saying, I'm not defending the people putting cones on, but this didn't just happen because the companies were well-behaved public citizens, right? They're behaving badly. They're creating ill will. We're lucky it's only traffic coning, right? And so this should be treated by the industry as a warning sign that they're really botching the job on engaging productively with the local population, and they should get that fixed before things get worse.
Right. And one accident can make a big difference. The airline industry was not very well regulated and was dangerous until Newt Rockne, the famous football coach, was killed in a crash. And the public outrage at that one event was so much that many people think that's what initiated all kinds of safety measures at the FAA.
What I
So,
took
wait.
from
Go ahead.
sorry, Junko. What I took from the last things that that both Phil and Bill have said is simply this: whatever you need to do to get the end user have more confidence and be sure of that you care what products you're putting on the road, do it. Don't discard that. Don't think that they do not matter.
I think there's two main things. One is change the messaging to stop using the hyperbolic, we're here saving lives, and get a messaging that's aligned with what's really going to happen on the roads, that stresses the benefit to the local people right here, right now, instead of, hey guys, suck it up because you don't have a choice and someday later maybe it'll get better. That messaging doesn't fly. So that's part one. The other part is to be more attentive to the negative consequences of your operation. If you have a problem that your cars are stalling all the time, then put people back in the cars or have people dispersed throughout the city. So the 30-minute delay becomes a 1-minute delay. I don't care how you do it, figure it out. But it's not okay to scale up when all this chaos is being created. And again, people say, oh, chaos, are exaggerating. Well, yeah, maybe 95% of the time you get it right. But every time you're in the headlines for creating a big cloggage, that's hurting your public image. You got to figure a way to stop that. And railing against the newspapers for covering things they want to cover is not how that's going to get improved. You got to stop making the messes, whatever that takes, and figure it out before you scale up, because otherwise all you get is more and bigger messes. So I think those two things: change the messaging and stop making the messes.
All right. Any closing statement from Bill?
Well, I think that I would look for a couple of signature things to change the messaging. And I think one would be to make a clear statement and support our idea of a computer driver. If they're truly safer, then there should be almost no accidents. And so there should be almost no cost to accepting and embracing the idea of a computer driver. And then the message would be, look, we're so confident in our technology and we think we've done such a good job that our product does have a duty of care that it owes to other road users. And if it breaches that duty, we're behind it financially.
There you go. That's a good wrap. Well, thank you very much for coming to the show. I think this is not one and done kind of discussion, so we will have you back again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye.